So the question we're asking everybody, we'll ask you, we'll start with you, sir, is why are you running for office and why are you the best choice? Not your opponents, but why are you the best choice?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to come here and present my views. My name is Abhiram. I am a businessman, small businessman. I've accomplished the American dream, and I came here as an immigrant 20 years back with nothing from India, and I've built a large business and savings. We own properties in 14 states, and I have proven leadership, created jobs. I'm married to my high school sweetheart and I have 2 small kids. So I represent the American worker, I represent the American family, and I have accomplished the American dream. And I think I'm the best candidate to go to Washington and provide some leadership on some audacious goals I have set on my website. There are 5 goals I set. One is a debt-free America, Hyperloop and subways for infrastructure. I want to make ours the safest and healthiest country in the world, and also want to have 0 landfill waste by 2050. I'm running for office to accomplish these big goals and set a platform where we can accomplish these audacious goals. And I think I'm the best candidate because I have the persistence, and I'll be the hardest working congressman for my 31st district constituents. Thank you.
Mr. Wall?
My name is Chris Wall, and I'm running for United States Representative, District 31. One of the main reasons I'm running for Congress is I think that our district is in dire need of someone who actually reflects the constituents, the hardworking Americans in the district. I also looking forward to the having this seat hold accountability and transparency, and that's not just what America needs, but our district needs as well. What sets me apart from these gentlemen here? First I want to talk about what makes us all of us good candidates. Is none of us are politicians, and I think that's what America needs. We need less politicians and more Americans that are reflective of, like I said, of the hardworking Americans that we do represent. I think what sets me apart from the others is my training experience. I've lived all around the world. I've been in law enforcement. I've been serving the public for 19 years. I've looking to serve them in a different capacity, just to speak up for those who can't speak for themselves, defend those who can't defend themselves. And I think that with my negotiation skills, I'm also a small business owner. With my business skills, negotiation skills, and my relevance to the workplace, I'm currently in the workforce. I think that that's not really represented in Congress very well, and just a plethora of experience and training that comes along with my job and my business.
We're not that excited.
No, that's fine. I'm Mike Williams. I'm a candidate for the United States Congress, Texas 31st District. My platform is written down if you visit my website. I served here in Austin for 30 years as a firefighter, taught for ACC for 18 years. And I live in Georgetown. I've been up in Georgetown since '86. So as what got me involved in this was lack of action from many of the incumbents in Washington, specifically my concern with our civil liberties, civil rights. Over half of the Bill of Rights is being shredded, from First Amendment freedom of speech, Second Amendment infringements, due process being turned on its head. This presumption of guilt and having to prove one's innocence is very dangerous territory to be in our country, and it's contrary to our founding. So those are the types of initiatives that I'm running on is restoring a sense of that civil liberties. Big on deconstructing, what I call deconstructing the administrative state. When we have bureaucrats, ambassadors, low-level military officers assuming a higher authority than a duly elected commander-in-chief, that's problematic to me. That needs to be corrected. So those kinds of issues are what I'm running on. Judicial and legislative branch accountability. I've got a couple of constitutional initiatives that I would like to advance regarding those two realms. And if your candidate's not going to step up to the plate and swing the bat, don't vote for them. If they're going to step up to the plate and hope 4 balls go by and spend 2 more years and retire, perhaps that candidate needs to be replaced. Thank you.
Still somewhat unusual for an incumbent congressman to be challenged, by his own party, especially one who served 9 terms. So I wondered if y'all could, you touched on a little bit about dissatisfaction, but wonder if you could be specific about anything in particular that you don't like about what Congressman Carter has done or not done. We'll start with you.
I don't have any specific grudge with John. I've supported him for 9 cycles. I don't consider John part of the problem. I don't consider John part of the solution, and that's why I'm running. I think he wants to coast a couple more years and fade off into the sweet by and by, and that's not doing it for me.
It's kind of, I really don't want to bash on the guy because he's not here, but at the same time, that's why I'm here, because he's not here. I found that when I moved to the area that it was hard to get any kind of information on him. He's not very transparent. He's not very, he's not reachable. He's not approachable. When I finally had the opportunity, and like Mike said, I supported him as well. I voted for him, and I've supported him in the past, and I finally got the opportunity to go to one of his town hall meetings. And I have to say that after I heard him talk to some of the constituents, I was embarrassed that I voted for him. He was very dismissive and I just didn't like his attitude. I didn't want that type of person, that type of attitude representing me. That's not who I am, and that's not how I talk to people. I feel like as a police officer, I speak to people on a professional level every day. I hold myself to a higher standard, and I expect that of my congressman, my representative. And when I saw him talk to those that weren't deserving of that, it was a big turnoff.
Same question.
I think time has changed. Time for change has come, and we as a nation are facing an existential crisis today with a lot of left-leaning ideas, and I'm doing a fight against socialism, and I have done a couple of events here, even in downtown Austin, where we are going to the people and saying how bad socialism is. Coming from India, where I lived under socialism and utter poverty, and Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren have never created a single job, and they never lived under a socialistic country. And look at Venezuela, once a very prosperous country, and what's its state today. And even in the US, we have rich states like Connecticut. One generation back, the wealthiest state in the country. Today, there are no jobs. The downtowns are dilapidated. You can go and buy office buildings for $300,000 or less. Class A office buildings, and it's loss of jobs, and we need to highlight this to the people, and from the Republican Party side, and John is not doing enough to reach out and to take the message across, and I want to be that candidate for change, and hence I want to replace John.
We'll start with you this time. What do you consider the most important piece of legislation that Congress could pass this year if you're elected?
The number one thing that really bothers me is you balance your budget at your house, you make $1,000 and you spend within your means. And I'm sure you do that, and you do that, and I do that. Why can't our federal government do that? It's beyond me why we don't have a balanced budget. Why we have a deficits of $22 trillion, and our future generations, we are going to be burdened by these huge debts that we are taking to finance the current debts that we are borrowing. My first goal in going to Congress, I built my company. I came here with $0. It's worth more than $20 to $30 million today. Saving money, working hard. We lost our conscience as a nation that we are not being thrifty as a nation. We are not saving enough money. And I want to go to Congress and come up with different solutions on eliminating the debt by 2050 and by balancing our budget by 2050. I know we have 30 more years, but at least we need to set some goals, and somebody has to focus on the job. And the current set of congressmen, they're not addressing that issue, and that's the first thing I want to go to Congress and accomplish.
Same question.
Yeah, same question. So thanks a lot for taking my answer. So I'm just going to have to agree with him, though. As a business owner, he'll agree with me that sure, there's a point where you're going to take credit and you've got to grow and build, right? But you've also got to have a plan to pay that back. And Congress just spends money like crazy, right? So there's no plan to pay this back. We're already borrowing on our children's behalves, and the problem is there's no vested interest in those folks that are in Congress right now to pay that back. I mean, you have half of Congress, more than half of Congress are millionaires, and I don't think our founding fathers set this up for that to happen. So you have these millionaires that are making decisions for us that in the working class that there's just such a disconnect there that I think that once if we can get a balanced budget, I think that a lot of other issues will fall in line and we'll have a lot easier time on to deal with other issues.
Single most important. Wow, that's tough because there's a number of things. Our system of government is just that, a system. So if you're going to pick one out, it would be the what I term as deconstructing the administrative state. Is what we've seen certainly over the past, let's call it just decade, what a president can do with executive action. And then when you examine Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution, and it says all legislative power is here invested to a Congress. Okay, so part of that deconstructing the administrative state is for Congress to put legislation on the president's desk that recaptures that Article 1 authority. They've ceded that to the executive branch over a number of decades. It's been going on for quite some time. And it's not intended to be that fluid. We're 3 years into Trump's first term, and he has quite literally erased most of 8 years of Obama's legacy through executive action. But Obama's legacy was built on executive action. So legislation that will recapture that Article 1 authority back to Congress so that this very fluid, very dynamic ebbs and flows in the economy, defense capabilities, veterans affairs, immigration, all issues kind of revolve around that. And it's right now rests in the hands of bureaucrats that can't be touched. Let's get that back into the hands of our senators and representatives who the voter can touch.
I want to get the thoughts of each of you on healthcare and how to expand access to healthcare. Is that something you favor? And if so, what would you do specifically to do that?
Government can mess up an anvil. Let's just say it like that. Government's not the answer. The answer is in the private sector. So how do you empower the private sector? Remove regulations. In fact, if you examine it, a lot of the problems are resulting from regulatory governmental tinkering. As I said in the previous question, it's a system. Okay, with our rising economy, the demographic, the economic scale that's rising the best, the quickest, is the lower half right now. So when you know, the old cliche, rising tide lifts all boats, that's true. So you maintain those policies that are creating rising wages, particularly in the the lower income end of the scale, and then you remove these barriers to free market forces that are artificially driving up healthcare costs. Use tax policy to incentivize private sector first-person purchasing. When you talk about first, second, and third-person purchasing, if I'm buying something for myself, I'm going to purchase what I want for what I can afford. Then you look at government intervention as third-person purchasing. I'm going to buy something for you that I perceive that you need, regardless of what it costs, and that's not a good formula. That's not a good formula. So in the healthcare thing, empower free market forces, remove government interference, empower the purchaser, the consumer with tax policy. The health savings accounts thing, make that a full tax credit initiative that they can apply to deductibles, healthcare premiums, things like that, and incentivize and give the public the resources to manage their own affairs. So that's the tack I would take.
I think that we've seen under this current presidency that deregulation in several different industries has promoted growth in those industries. I think that's it promotes a healthy competition. I also like what some of the states are doing with in terms of setting up wholesale pharmacies. I don't know if you're familiar with what Florida is doing, setting up the wholesale pharmacy in Florida and working with wholesale pharmacy in Canada, and immediately that caused competition. I mean, you had American pharmaceutical companies, trying to make deals with, Florida to bring down those drug costs. So I think that the deregulation has a lot to do with it. The government has no business in healthcare. One other idea that I had was, as far as the VA goes, our current congressman is, I believe, part of the construction board with the VA. And I think that why are we spending money and building on something that doesn't work? We've already proven time and time again that the VA is broken. So what I would suggest is take that money that we're using to build those and allow those veterans to be able to use that money and go to their own primary healthcare physicians. I know that there are some programs right now that allow that. However, what they're running into is problems with getting those bills paid. So a lot of those doctors and physicians are reluctant to take those patients because of the delay in payments. So again, government's in charge of that. It's not working. They need to get out of the business of healthcare. The deregulation is going to cause that competition to have an open and better market.
Let me ask you a question. How many of you have been on a cruise and had buffet on a cruise ship? The reason I'm asking is it's unlimited food. And you know how much wastage is happening? People just go, fill their plate, and then leave the entire thing. Same thing with Medicare. Bernie Sanders' plan is Medicare for all with no co-pays and no deductibles. Can you believe how the system is going to survive? I lived in the UK for 1 year and I've seen how NHS is disastrous. There is 6-month lines for even basic services. So Medicare for all, it's not the government's business to run any business, especially Medicare or health insurance. So what do we do? What is the solution from my side? Charles Schwab has eliminated all trading fees. When you go buy a stock, it's zero. You don't pay anything. Why is that? That's the beauty of the market forces that are at work. The healthcare industry is so regulated, so many rules and so many laws. I can't understand why a insurance provider cannot sell insurance across the states. There are things Congress can do to make the insurance industry more efficient, more competitive, and I will ensure that every single American has health insurance, but through the private carriers, not by the government, and it's available through innovation and technology. So that's my plan for healthcare. Thank you.
We'll start with you on this one. Talk about your positions on immigration and border security. Again, be specific as much as you can.
I am an immigrant who came here legally 20 years back, and I don't. How many times you go on the road and you get a traffic ticket for going 20 miles or 10 miles above the speed limit? The beauty of this country is we all follow the laws. Why is it okay for somebody not to follow the law and say you are an illegal alien, you can come walk over the border and come here and live? There are certain laws this country has. I'm all against illegal immigration, but being an immigrant, I know the pain what immigrants go through. I want to make the process more easier, there are a lot of things that can be done to make the immigration process better for the existing immigrants, and I will work on that. But I don't want any illegal immigration to this country, and if that means building a wall, which is only $5 billion, it is nothing when you compare that to the federal budget. We need to do that to stop any kind of illegal immigration.
Can you ask it one more time, please?
Your position on immigration and border security, be specific as much as you can.
Okay. The border security, I'm really happy with the direction it's going now. A lot of folks say walls don't work. I've heard that argument, but being a police officer and also working close with the jail, of course I know walls work. Are they an end-all to illegal immigration? No, absolutely not. There is no end-all to illegal immigration. People are going to find a way, right? But I think that defunding ICE or defunding those organizations is not the path to that. I think that you have, like Abraham said, I think that we need to look at the path to citizenship. We need to relook at that. We need to streamline it if possible, and we need to make it more attainable to folks that are coming over here trying to make a better life. As a police officer, though, I have to say that there are those that come to the country and they have no intentions on becoming a U.S. citizen. They've been here 10, 15, 20 years, and that goes back on also the responsibility of the business owners and folks here that allow them to be here and pay them and work undocumented. So I think we have enough laws on the books. I think we just need to enforce them, and I think we need to look at the path to citizenship again. And if there's something that needs to be fixed or something we can streamline to help these folks out, that's something we need to look at. I'm a third-generation Texan. My grandfather is from Mexico. He came over legally. He waited until he got a citizenship to bring his wife over. He built his own house. He built a house for my grandmother and my uncle. And they all came over legally, retired from the railroad and from the shipyards in Texas City. And I think that if he could do it, he taught himself how to read and write. I think if he can do it, anybody else can. If you have the will to do it, you'll find a way.
The immigration and border security issues, they're linked, but then they're not. The border security issue extends beyond just the immigration issue. You've got, criminal routes for drug smuggling, human trafficking, routes of terrorist infiltration. So the physical barriers, the technological infrastructure, and then the personnel to staff those various assets to enforce the law on the border, it's the system. Now the immigration thing, the disincentivize illegal immigration. If folks are coming here, to escape economic poverty and yada yada in their home country, I get it. But don't come here just to, take advantage of the Americans' generosity. We've got foreign aid for that. So you can disincentivize that. Folks that want to come, that's what our country is built on. We know the history of the country. Folks that want to come here to experience a free nation, to contribute to that culture, the melting pot thing. That's what makes us so great. When you talk about synergy and you talk about the whole being greater than the sum of its parts, the United States of America is that. With all the cultures that we've brought together under a system of, justice for all, folks that want to come here and be a part of that, yeah, let's plow the road for them. Let's make those immigration policies efficient as much as government can, and then disincentivize folks that want to come here and just take advantage of the system. The coming across the line and get more welfare than U.S. citizens. That's problematic. Get more government assistance than homeless veterans. That's problematic. The chain migration and the visa lottery. Man, that idea was not well thought out from its beginning and should be ended, that program. But folks that want to come here, yeah, let's plow the road and make sure that they can come and contribute to our society. And then the security thing is a multifaceted thing for national security, border security.
Go ahead.
Just sticking with that one, because no one mentioned it, the DACA kids, the kids who were born or moved to the U.S. brought to the U.S. as children illegally, and then President Obama, through executive order, gave them a path to stay here. President Trump tried to undo it, and then there was a legislative attempt to fix it, and then the courts jumped in, and we're hung up in there somewhere. What would you do with that situation?
Yeah, the DACA issue, I've lost track of it myself. I think it's made it to the Supreme Court, if I'm not mistaken, or it's about to. The executive action that Obama took, and Trump actually offered early in his first term, I can't remember, first, second year, to try and work with the Democrats on a solution to that. So it's like, okay, the folks have been here a generation, pert near. Well, yeah, in fact, they have. So if they've not been a criminal element, I know that some of the people in that population, are gangbangers and whatnot, but if they've been contributing, don't have problems with law enforcement, then things can be worked out. I will say this, people, like Abraham spoke to earlier, it's a long process coming through, playing by the rules and everything to become a citizen as an immigrant. There'll be no cutting in line. Wherever the end of the line is where the DACA folks would eventually have to start to working their way through this process. So yeah, that's an issue that can be addressed, and Americans are compassionate people. I would want to come down on the side of discretion for those folks, but then we've got all the issues that have to be worked out. But I'm gonna come down on the side of discretion for those folks, but it's going to be at the end of the line. They got to get at the end of the line.
Yeah, I'm not sure where it stands now. Like Mike said, it's kind of faded, from the headlines. I think, and not knowing how many DACA recipients there are. Do you guys know ballpark? It's been so long since they've talked about it. How many?
Hundreds of thousands.
Hundreds of
I don't
thousands?
remember exactly.
Okay, so I don't think it'd be feasible to do a case-by-case basis on something like that number, but whether it's their grandparents that are here, or their parents or guardians, certainly they fall into a right to path to citizenship. Like Mike said, as long as there's no criminal history there, anything of that nature, I don't have any problems with them moving forward to become a citizen of the United States. I just kind of question why they haven't to this point. There may be some people that were only here 6 months. I get it, or there may be some people that are here 10, 15 years. You kind of question, well, if you've been here that long, what's the holdup? What's the setback? And if it's on our part, if it's something like I said, we need to fix and we need to streamline, then we need to reconstruct that.
Good question. I will be extremely firm on stopping future illegal immigration from across the world and send a message out that you can't just walk into the US illegally. The reason is Europe has no borders at this point, and I don't know if you have visited a few countries like Belgium or even suburbs of Paris. You can't recognize the neighborhoods. And my problem is the immigrants need to be assimilated into any society, and US does a great job at that, and I am the best proof of that. But future, we need to stop any illegal immigration. But for all the existing children who are here, let's be considerate to them and let's provide a path to citizenship as long as there is no criminal or any kind of violence records against them.
Turn to gun violence real quickly, Ken. Are there any measures you would support such as to reform gun laws, such as universal background checks or red flag laws, anything of that kind that you would support?
This is a very important subject for me, and I've listed it as my goal, one of my 5 goals. I want to make this the safest country in the world, because during my campaigning, I met a lot of people who are really scared because of gun violence. I want people to have guns, but on the other side, we don't want people to be scared of living in our society freely. So what do? So there are a lot of countries who have more guns per capita than the US, like UK, Norway, and Australia. And there are a lot of things they did as countries to prevent gun violence. And there are best practices across the world. Some countries bought back guns, some countries increased background checks, some countries did more mental health checks before anybody can buy a gun, and basic things that can be done by technology, using more technology. I would go that direction, and I want ultimately to make ours the best and the safest country where anybody can just walk freely and live happily without fearing about gun violence.
So, specifically, which of those measures would you like to see implemented?
More background checks. I would go for that, and definitely I support the red laws and I also would like to see if we can implement a solution like buying back guns from the society, and also on it can be making appropriate checks before somebody buys a gun. So that's some areas I would really focus on.
So it's hard to have a conversation, of course, with gun laws and not include mental health. The mental health crisis, as a police officer, I'm on the front lines of mental health crisis in America. I would say in a given week at work, I probably work a mental health crisis every other day. What I've seen, and before I get into that, I don't support any other a universal background check or red flag laws. I'm against that. I think there's enough laws on the books. I think where the disconnect is from your mental health facilities, between them and the background checks. Right now, law enforcement hands are tied on a lot of calls where we go to, and I think that we need to focus more on mental health. I think we need to focus more on the facilities, education on mental health, and just being able to provide more of an outreach for those who are suffering from mental health, to be able to get that service and treatment very quickly.
So when you say disconnect with mental health facilities, you mean that we don't have enough of them?
Well, as far as the facilities, no, I think that they're very underfunded, and the beds, there's not enough beds, there's not enough clinics. and this is just my experience I'm speaking of on a daily basis as a police officer. And like I said, a lot of times our hands are tied of what we can do with folks that we know are suffering if they don't meet a certain threshold. I mean, you can use common sense and know if someone's having a mental health crisis, and if they don't meet that certain threshold, of course you can't take their liberty and their rights away and just handcuff them and take them in to get seen. But there has to be more resources and more that law enforcement can do when they reach these folks. I know that and I can't get into specifics, but I can look them up later if you want to. But I think you guys have seen enough with some of the shootings that you start looking at the background of these shooters and you see that law enforcement has been to the house several times, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times, and what was done? Nothing was done. Well, because their hands are tied, there's only so much they can do. We know there's a problem. It's just that because of certain laws that are in place that we're not able to take the next step and get those folks the help that they need.
Well, I mean, are there laws that you think should be changed then because of the way that you keep characterizing it as your hands being tied?
Yeah.
What
Not
would
so.
you wanna-
So the laws. So not so much as the gun laws, but healthcare laws, where we can actually step in and take charge and actually get these folks help. They don't have to be. Not a specific example, but I shouldn't have to wait till your neighbor is naked in the street to be able to take to be able to get them seen right then. It shouldn't be that extreme where I have to get them help. I should at a lower threshold. I should be able to at least get them seen. A lot of times people will volunteer to get help, but if we get on scene and there's a disturbance and they're hearing voices and they're seeing things, but they don't want to hurt themselves, but they'll agree to go to get checked out. Once they leave and they go to the hospital, if they say, well, hey, look, I don't want to be here anymore, there's nothing they can do to hold those folks and finish the process and get them seen and get them medication or even if they have been a patient there. If that person has been a patient there before and they've had medication and they decide at that time that, no, I'm fine, I don't want to hurt myself, I want to leave. And then they go home and have access to a gun or get a gun and go out and shoot somebody. Who's the first person they want to point their finger at? The police department. Why didn't we do anything? Well, there's only so much we can do.
That was good. But back to the gun issue. The gun laws on the books are adequate. If you look at the failures, some of the big failures, the Sutherland Springs shooting, the Florida school shootings, those were failures in the system as it exists. It wasn't the lack of laws, it was the lack of follow through of the laws that were on the books.
Enforcement. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So to create more laws on top of a system that's already struggling to enforce the laws we have is not the answer. The red flag thing, to turn literally millions of American law-abiding citizens into criminals overnight. We went down that road with the 18th Amendment and Prohibition and decided that was a very bad idea. You just substitute gun control laws for liquor laws is what the issue is going to be there. So we don't need to repeat that mistake of history. But enforcement of current laws, and that goes back to enabling law enforcement, getting them the resources that they need, which equates to dollar signs. But when I talk about making sure that law enforcement is adequately funded, that's one of the services that taxpayers pay for and demand excellence. I know that Chris would agree with that. Demand excellence. When you look at law enforcement and emergency services in general, that's a fundamental function of government. So if we've got the laws on the books, but law enforcement doesn't have adequate resources to address the issue, then it's an issue of empowering or enabling law enforcement, facilitating law enforcement, and it always comes back to dollar signs. And it's not the government's money. That tax dollar came from the citizen. It's going to go back to a service the citizen really wants. When you break it down, law enforcement, with all the claptrap stuff about banging on the popo, I don't do that. I know your job. That's why I was a firefighter. I couldn't have been a cop. I don't have the temperament for it. I don't have the patience for it. But those people who do have that skill set, we need to back them up, and that means money, man. So, no more gun laws. Just let's enable the enforcement of the laws we've got.
So you guys have been focusing on mass shootings. What about domestic violence? What about the other types of gun violence?
It's a related thing. It's a societal thing. It's like, okay, do we as a society want to act in a civil fashion, or do we want to hate? I'd like to see that, the anger toned down. It's on the media. That's why I don't watch the media anymore. I enjoyed reading y'all's paper in the lobby while we were waiting today. I'll sit
Thank
down
you.
and I'll sit down and read the paper, because if I turn on the television and watch whatever channel, it makes you angry. And I think they're doing that. Well, I know they're doing that on purpose. You can't do that day in and day out and not be purposeful. And then when I drive around the community, it's not boiling over. Chris is an active duty police officer, and that's when people dial 911, they're calling Chris. When I was, an active duty firefighter, when people dialed 911, they were calling for me. So I saw more of those kinds of events than a regular person, who has a regular job would see. But then when I would go home, it's like, and I know, well, I'll let Chris speak to how law enforcement defuses, but firefighters, man, we defuse sitting around the table like this with one of two things: a pot of coffee or a big tub of ice cream, and we talk it out. So that when we go home, we don't take that home with us. Well, society doesn't see that. The regular folks don't see that part of it.
I guess my question is more about what would you do in office to address the other kinds of gun violence?
The gun laws on the books, even if you need to increase, punishment for gun-related violence, but it's already pretty stiff. But the plea bargaining stuff is outrageous, where if somebody's in for a violent offense and they're able to plea it down to a nonviolent offense of some sort, and then 5 years later, nobody remembers what the plea deal was. That's, with Trump's initiative, some of the conservative blowback to that is there's a lot of plea deals with the second chance thing that they signed about a year ago now, I guess. A lot of blowback was it didn't account for plea deals. It's nonviolent people, but then there's violent offenders that are in there on plea deals. So if you can, work on that through the judicial side of things, that way you identify those people. The Sutherland Springs shooter was a domestic violence offender. Should not have been able to purchase a firearm, but was able to because the Air Force dropped the ball. So that goes back to facilitating enforcement of the existing laws. They're plenty good, and whether it's domestic violence, just a malcontent in society, and that offense involves a firearm, bump the penalty up, disallow plea bargains, that violent gun offense is on the record so that it can't be expunged or be forgotten about because of some plea deal. I think that's outrageous to me, is how that works in that realm, because those folks are the problem and they shouldn't be given a break like that.
Okay, so probably get in trouble for saying this, but here's the thing. So when we talk about, when Mike talks about enforcing the laws and the word enforcement, a lot of the times it's not coming from law enforcement. It's the judges and prosecutors that decide to pick up this case, or they don't see value in it, or whatever. And I'm not by any means talking about every judge, and I'm not talking about every prosecutor, okay? But you guys picked up a story not too long ago. I was injured in the line of duty in Elgin. Do you guys remember that? No? So we dealt with a guy who was he was on methamphetamine. He grabbed one of my private areas during an arrest and injured me, and attempted to take a gun away from a fellow police, one of my officers that was on duty. He sat in jail for a couple weeks, and all the charges were dismissed. So when things like that happen and folks get out of jail and they think, well, that wasn't that bad, I can do that again, what message does that send? You know, it's law enforcement and citizens can do so much. It's what happens after that with the prosecutors and the judges. And, you know, what I can do about that as a congressman with influence, that's something that I'll look at, you know, if and when I'm elected. So that's where a lot of the problems stem from.
Thank you, Chris, for what all you do. I really
Appreciate it.
appreciate
Thank you.
all the brave men and women who serve our country day in and day out. On any kind of domestic violence, anything, there are definitely areas for improvement. And I am going to again go to the global best practices and see what policies have succeeded in other countries, and try to implement them here. There is definitely an area for improvement there, and we need to come up with solutions.
We have a policy at our department where if there's a family violence arrest, that we automatically do an emergency protection order. We no longer give an option. I think that's something else that police departments across the nation can look at as well. And if that's something that they think they can implement, I think that's worth a shot. A lot of times, you know, the women are scared, or women or men are scared. The victim is scared to put that emergency protection order on them, and that kind of takes that out of their hands, so that they don't feel like, you know, it's their doing or their fault. They don't have to feel guilty, or they don't have to answer to their spouse later. You know, so I think that's something that should be looked at as well.
Ask about impeachment. I've been asking everybody running for Congress or Senate about impeachment. So if you'd been in Congress just a couple months ago, you would have faced a vote for or against to forward the articles of impeachment to the Senate. First, just how would you have voted on that? And I'm going to assume you probably would have voted against it, but if so, do you think the president did anything wrong here? Or is this something the Democrats sort of trumped up on it? So start with you, Mr. Wilson.
Okay, no, I would not have supported this. I decided to run about a year ago this week. It was early February last year. And one of the things I've done, you know, you grow up, I grew up, knowing that there's this thing called the Constitution out there, and this thing called the Bill of Rights out there, and the Declaration. I've actually been studying it. And when this stuff came up, this impeachment stuff, it was so outside the purview of what's intended in the Constitution. It's just absurd. It's absurd. It's all invented out of whole cloth. When I listen to a sitting representative say that there's overwhelming evidence, but then never gives one element of it, I can't fathom that kind of deception. The folks in Burbank need to elect a better liar, at least. That's just absurd. And then to double down and triple down and keep after it. No, the whole thing has been very, well, I'd say it's been harmful to the country, but nobody's paying attention. Nobody's been watching the thing. They know it's a hoax. They know it's baloney. So it's not been as damaging as I remember the Watergate days. That was kind of damaging, and I was in high school at the time. It made for great report writing when I was taking government class in high school. That was legitimate, but this thing going on now is not. So,
Can you ask one more time? I'm sorry.
Just mainly, would you have voted for or against the articles of impeachment when they came through the House? And if you would have voted against them, did the president do anything wrong here?
Okay. Yeah, I would not have voted for it. I would have voted against it. I'm in a business, obviously, you know, we've been talking about where you can accuse anybody of anything. I want to see proof. If there's no proof, then we need to move on. It's a big waste of time. and I just it's a shame. I wouldn't have voted.
I would not have voted for it, but I think the president's actions were inappropriate, and they don't classify as impeachable high crimes and misdemeanors as defined in our Constitution, and hence I wouldn't have voted for the articles of impeachment.
Any more questions?
Let me ask about religious freedom laws. You had mentioned the Bill of Rights being traveled and whatnot. And we saw the Supreme Court case a year or so ago on the whole bakery shop, and we had the county clerk in Kentucky who refused to provide a marriage license. And on the Republican side, quite often we have people saying we need some kind of laws or more protections on the religious freedom side of people not wanting to violate their religious beliefs. So can you address that? Are there things that Congress needs to do to on either side of religious freedom?
So I believe in complete religious freedom to the individual, and that's defined in Article 1 of our Constitution. So I believe in what is there in the Constitution already. So it pretty clearly defines our religious freedoms. Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe in religious freedoms. I think that I'm trying to think of specifically what you're trying to ask. Do you think that do we need to put something else?
We get into these situations on the Democratic side. It would be more to protect the quite often
the customer
quite often
or
it's
the
a gay rights,
right,
a gay marriage issue or something like that. And then on the Republican side, quite often it's me as a business owner or me as a government official. My religious freedoms are being infringed if I have to
right.
Do something that furthers you doing something that I don't
Well,
believe in.
so it's like on those, just using those as examples, the case by case basis. So like as far as, he's a business owner and I'm a business owner, and not in the capacity where we would, or at least what we sell at my business. If you're straight, gay, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's a product. You buy it if you want it. If you don't, you don't. So it wouldn't be something that someone would ask me to. Well, I guess they could ask us to make a specific design for that, but I think that there's enough competition on the market just for about any kind of product or anything you want to make that you should be able to. If you refuse service based on that, I mean, if that is truly the reason why, if it's your religious beliefs, then yeah, you should be able to do that. As far as the government, let's say, for instance, if you have a state that has gay marriage as a right, you can two men can marry or two women can marry, and you have a secretary in there that refuses. There's got to be some other outlet for those folks to take to be able to get there. I think that he or she should be able to refuse, but there also should be other avenues for those folks to be able to get the same permit. I'm not going to discriminate against one to satisfy the other. There has to be another outlet.
Okay, when you talk about the question of civil liberties and religious liberties, every problem that you spoke of was manufactured by government, whether it's local, state, or federal. So, I'll break it down briefly because I don't want to cheat on my time limit. The bakery issue. If somebody comes into a bakery shop and wants to buy a cake or a cupcake, and what's on the shelf, man? If they request a custom-made job, then that's at a request of that baker's artistic abilities. And then that artist has discretion on what kind of picture they're going to paint. That's legitimate refusal. Government's got no business interfering with that. No's a no. They can go down the road. They can learn to decorate a cake themselves. The marriage thing. Government only has one legitimate role in whether you call it marriage, a civil union, or domestic partnership. That's when it breaks up, the division of assets. Other than that, they've got no role there. Now, if they want to file a domestic partnership, or however you want to term it, by whatever name you call it's irrelevant. If the government wants to make a record of that this partnership began on this date, so that should it ever dissolve, they'll know at a point in time where division of assets, that's in government's purview. Other than that, it doesn't matter. Like I said, I've studied American history, constitutional foundings, and yada yada. Thomas Jefferson, and it's paraphrasing, I don't remember these things exactly. It does me no harm by what name my neighbor calls God, or how many gods he worships. It does not pick my pocket, it does not break my arm. It's not government's business. So these issues that have come up from social issues. You know, the golden rule is really good, and you look across all the major religions in the world, in some form or fashion, they recognize treat others as you wish to be treated. If it does my neighbor no harm, what I do in the privacy of my own home is my business. Period. So you go.
We're good? Yeah. We have like 5 minutes left. Is there anything we didn't touch on that you want to make a point of saying? What, at 2 minutes each, if you like?
You want to go first, Abraham?
I'll go first. When was the last time we saw a project like the Golden Gate Bridge built, or sent a man to the moon as a nation? We stopped dreaming big as a country. We are just coasting along, and we are not setting high goals for our nation. So if I'm elected to Congress, I would unite the country just as Honest Abe did during the Civil War, which is where the country was badly divided then as it is today. We need leadership in Congress for somebody who can dream big, accomplish big goals, and make sure. I'm not a Republican or a Democrat here. I'm an American first, going for Congress, and I want to set these high goals, and I want to make my plan is for America should win, and for that I want to make it a debt-free America by 2050. I want to focus on infrastructure projects like Hyperloop and subways. Nobody is thinking big. Why don't we have subway? You go to China and every village is connected by a bullet train. Why are not the big projects coming here? Because there is no leadership and thought process to get them done. I want to make this the safest and the healthiest country in the world, and I want to also have a zero landfill waste by 2040 or 2050. And how do I accomplish that? These are already being done successfully by private enterprises like Google and Apple today. We just need to have the will to get there and set these goals, and that's what I'll accomplish if I'm elected to Congress.
I just want to say that I appreciate sharing the table with these guys. I think that it's great that the district has more of a choice this go around. I think that the days of the career politician are over, or should be over. I think that if you choose any one of us, I think that you're going in with a leg up. None of us are politicians. I think that's what government needs. I think that's what Congress needs, more people that reflect society and those that are in the working class. And it's common sense legislation is what we need. You cannot keep voting for the same people and expect a different outcome. It's just not going to happen. And we've seen it time and time again, every cycle, voting for the same people, saying the same exact things. And a lot of it has to do with the, political action committees and everything else. We can talk, all night about all that good stuff, fun stuff. But the thing is that we all share that same, that common factor is that none of us are politicians. And I think that that's good for the American people.
I too would like to thank the statesman. This has been outstanding. This is what makes America the fantastic country that it is. The ability to sit down, express ideas, ask excellent questions, good follow-up questions. That's what makes America the fantastic place that it is. The ability to choose, the ability to listen to those who will step up and run. I can guarantee you, this is our first rodeo, and I feel like the clown that was in the barrel that the bull kept bumping around. But it's been a good experience, and I think it's been good for the people in our district that will cast a vote, the folks down here in Austin that will be able to vote for their prospective candidates and representatives. Chris touched on it, but the paradox I've seen in this, human nature, the folks I talk to don't like the way things are, but then they don't like change either. So it's trying to break the ice and get them to step back from emotion, think critically a little bit, and think, okay, I'm not really voting for change, fundamental change. I'm voting for somebody that's got a little bit of common sense and knows how to solve problems. And that's what I'm trying to convey to my constituents in an effort to earn their vote. But I really appreciate y'all's time.